The lights of the studio burned brighter than usual that night, but it wasn't the spotlights that made the room feel hot. It was the tension. Candace Owens had walked onto the stage with her usual smirk, armed with quick comebacks and the confidence of someone who believed she could out-talk anyone. But across from her sat Denzel Washington, calm, collected, hands folded lightly, eyes steady. He didn't fidget, he didn't blink nervously. He was waiting, and everyone in the audience could feel it, something was about to erupt. The host hadn't even finished his introduction before the clash began. "Tonight," he said, "we have two strong voices, two very different visions of America. Candace Owens and Denzel Washington." The crowd clapped politely, but the moment the applause faded, Candace leaned in, her tone sharp as a blade. "You talk about unity, Denzel," she said, "but let's be honest, your message is drenched in victimhood. People don't want to hear division disguised as truth. They want solutions, not sermons." The audience murmured. It was a direct jab, and Candace smiled as if she'd already won. But Denzel didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward just enough to own the space between them. His voice was low, steady, and the words cut sharper than any shout. "Division," he said slowly, letting the silence hang for a second. "Candace, your entire platform thrives on turning neighbors into enemies. You call it freedom, but what you really sell is fear. And fear doesn't heal anyone, it breaks us further apart." The room stiffened. A few gasps escaped from the audience. Candace's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second before she fired back. "That's rich coming from you," she snapped. "You make everything about race, about grievance. You point fingers instead of lifting people up. How is that healing?" Denzel didn't blink. He raised his hand slightly, not to silence her but to reclaim the floor with the sheer weight of presence. "I don't point fingers," he said firmly. "I point to truth. And if the truth makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's because deep down, you know your words divide more than they unite." The audience erupted in applause. Some even stood up. Cameras zoomed in on Candace's tightened jaw, her eyes flashing as she realized she had just been put on defense within the first minute of the broadcast. The host looked rattled. He tried to interject, but the clash had already ignited. Denzel had set the tone, and it was clear, this wasn't going to be a polite panel. This was war. Candace tried to regain control of the room, leaning back in her chair with a forced laugh. "Oh, so now you're the arbiter of truth," she mocked. "You get to decide who divides and who heals. That's exactly the problem, people like you think you own morality." She gestured broadly to the crowd, hoping to rally them. "He sits here like some preacher, telling America it's broken unless we see it through his lens." A few audience members clapped, but it was scattered, weak. Most were leaning forward, waiting for Denzel. The cameras caught him in silence, calm, unshaken. He didn't need to rush, he knew the timing mattered more than the volume. Slowly, he leaned closer to the microphone, and his words landed like stones dropping into still water. "Candace," he said, voice even but carrying power, "when you spend your career minimizing people's pain, mocking their struggles, and calling it strength, that's not morality. That's exploitation. You don't lift people up. You step on them to climb higher." The crowd gasped, followed by a roar of applause. The host tried to cut in, but the energy was already boiling over. Candace's face flushed. She shot back quickly, trying to control the narrative. "You love painting me as the villain, don't you?" she snapped. "But at least I'm telling Americans to take responsibility for their own lives. You coddle them. You trap them in a mindset that they're powerless unless the government or people like you swoop in to save them." Denzel tilted his head, his eyes narrowing just slightly, the way a teacher looks at a student who just gave the wrong answer. His pause was deliberate, long enough to make her words echo in the silence. Then he spoke, calm but cutting. "No. I remind them that they have power, even when the system is built to deny it. And here's the difference between us, Candace, I don't need to insult people to empower them. You call it tough love. I call it cruelty dressed up as strategy." The crowd roared again, clapping, shouting, some even whistling. The camera zoomed in on Candace's forced smile, tight, unconvincing, almost trembling at the edges. Denzel leaned back, but his eyes never left hers. "Your platform," he said slowly, "doesn't build bridges. It builds walls. And the sad part is, you call those walls freedom." For a moment, the studio froze. Candace opened her mouth to reply, but nothing came out right away. Her silence, even for those few seconds, said more than any counterargument. The host, sweating now, jumped in, "We need to take a quick break," but the audience was already buzzing, phones out, capturing clips. Denzel had landed the first real blow, and it was clear, this wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a dismantling. Candace leaned forward, her voice sharp as glass. "Denzel, you might be a great actor, but this isn't Hollywood. Politics isn't about drama, it's about solutions. People don't need your speeches, they need results." A few in the crowd clapped politely, but the sound fell flat against the heavy silence of the room. Denzel didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair for a moment, almost casual, like a man deciding whether his opponent was even worth the energy. Then he leaned forward again, slow and deliberate, his eyes locked on hers. "Candace," he said, voice calm but cutting, "the real stage isn't Hollywood. It's America's streets. It's the empty factories where jobs disappeared. It's the overcrowded classrooms where kids sit two to a desk. It's the families who work 2 jobs and still can't pay rent." His tone was steady, but the weight in his words pulled the room tighter, every listener leaning in. Candace tried to laugh it off, but it rang hollow. "That's just rhetoric," she snapped. "People are tired of being preached at." Denzel didn't even blink. He pointed toward the audience, not with a flourish, but with quiet conviction. "You call it preaching. I call it telling the truth. And the truth is this: your platform doesn't unite people. It divides them. You thrive on keeping Americans suspicious of each other. Black against white, poor against middle class, urban against rural. That division is your power source. But power built on fear doesn't heal, it festers." The studio went silent. Not tense silence, stunned silence. Even the cameraman hesitated, unsure whether to zoom in on Candace's frozen face or Denzel's unwavering stare. Candace shifted in her seat, forcing a smirk that didn't quite land. "You think you've got all the answers, Denzel. But the truth is, people are tired of being told they're victims. I'm offering them empowerment, not excuses." Her words were sharp, but there was a tremor under the surface, a tiny crack in the armor. Denzel leaned in, elbows resting firmly on the table. His voice dropped lower, slower, each word hitting like a hammer. "Empowerment," he repeated. "You call it empowerment to tell people their struggles don't exist? That poverty is just laziness? That racism is just whining? That when someone gets passed over, harassed, or locked out of opportunity, it's their own fault? That's not empowerment. That's denial dressed up in slogans." The audience let out a low murmur, tension building. Denzel didn't look away, his eyes drilling through her rehearsed smile. "You know what empowerment actually is, Candace? It's telling a kid in South Chicago that he matters just as much as the kid in Beverly Hills. It's telling a single mother working night shifts that her fight to keep the lights on isn't invisible. It's standing up for people who don't get invited to the table, and making sure their voices are heard loud enough that no one can pretend they didn't." Candace opened her mouth to fire back, but Denzel cut in before she could. His tone was calm, but there was steel in it. "You've built your platform on tearing down your own people to please a crowd that laughs at them when the cameras are off. And you want to call that empowerment?" He shook his head slowly. "That's not power. That's performance. And performances fade. Truth doesn't." The studio was dead quiet. No applause sign, no forced laughs, just silence so heavy it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Denzel leaned back, folding his arms, as if daring her to try again. Candace's smirk faltered, and for the first time she hesitated. Her hand fidgeted with the note cards on the desk, as though somewhere in the stack there might be a line sharp enough to save her. She finally forced out, "You just don't like that I refuse to play the victim card. I'm not here to coddle anyone. I'm here to tell the truth." Denzel let out a quiet chuckle, low, controlled, almost dangerous. He leaned forward again, but this time his voice carried more weight, filling every corner of the studio. "No, Candace. The problem isn't that you tell the truth. The problem is that you sell lies dressed as truth. You stand here and call it tough love, but it's not love at all. It's exploitation. You don't heal," he jabbed a finger toward the desk between them, "you divide. And you've made a career out of it." The crowd stirred, some clapping, others holding their breath. Denzel didn't pause for them, he pressed harder. "You talk about strength, but real strength doesn't come from tearing people down to make yourself look big. Real strength comes from standing in solidarity, even when it's unpopular, even when it costs you something. And let's be honest, you haven't risked a damn thing. You cash checks while others carry scars." Candace's face flushed, and her eyes darted toward the cameras, almost as if she could will the broadcast to cut to commercial. But it didn't. The red light glowed steady. Denzel's gaze never wavered. "History," he continued, his voice now like a sermon delivered through clenched teeth, "will not remember who got the most applause or who got the most views. It'll remember who stood on the side of dignity and who stood on the side of mockery. And Candace, when your name comes up, the record won't be kind." The studio erupted, half in applause, half in stunned disbelief. Candace shifted in her seat, the weight of his words settling over her like chains. For the first time, she had no comeback. Candace's silence was deafening. The studio lights seemed harsher now, exposing every twitch, every forced smile she tried to muster. She finally leaned toward the mic, her tone brittle. "You act like you're some savior, Denzel, but you're just another celebrity lecturing America. People don't need speeches from actors. They need solutions." That line might have landed elsewhere, but not here, not tonight. Denzel straightened in his chair, the calm still in his body but his eyes burning. He didn't raise his voice, he sharpened it. "You want solutions? Here's one: stop selling division for ratings. Stop turning people's pain into your personal brand. That's not politics. That's parasitism." The crowd gasped. A few even stood, clapping mid-broadcast. Denzel's delivery hit like a hammer because he wasn't just aiming at Candace, he was aiming at everyone who profited from polarization. Candace tried to laugh it off, but it came out hollow. "You think you're untouchable because you've got fame. But fame doesn't make you right." Denzel leaned in, his words cutting through the applause. "No, Candace, what makes me right is that I'm not afraid to tell the truth, even when it costs me. You built your platform by pointing fingers at the very communities you should be standing with. You're not challenging the system, you're protecting it, feeding it, because it feeds you." The audience roared louder. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of discomfort on her face. "And let me tell you something," Denzel continued, his tone steady but thunderous in impact, "when you look back years from now, you'll have to answer one question: did you make life better for anyone but yourself? That's the difference between me and you. I'm not perfect, but at least I can say I tried to lift people up. You?" He paused, letting the silence stretch like a blade. "You just cashed in." The studio broke into chaos, applause, shouts, even chants. Candace sat frozen, her trademark confidence crumbling under the weight of a truth she couldn't spin. Candace's composure finally cracked. She slammed her hand on the desk, the echo cutting through the applause like a warning shot. "You don't get to question my motives, Denzel," she snapped, her voice sharp, trembling between fury and desperation. "You sit there in your Hollywood bubble, preaching about communities you abandoned the moment you cashed your first paycheck. Don't lecture me about authenticity." The audience let out a collective gasp. It was the outburst they'd been waiting for, but Denzel didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Slowly, almost deliberately, he turned his body toward her, one elbow resting on the arm of his chair. The silence stretched, unbearable, until he spoke. "You think this is about me?" he asked, voice calm but piercing. "This isn't about Hollywood or fame. This is about accountability. You've built a career tearing down the very people who look like you. Calling them lazy, saying they're victims, while cozying up to the same system that profits off their suffering. That's not bravery, Candace. That's betrayal." The crowd erupted, half in cheers, half in shock. Candace's jaw tightened, her eyes flashing with anger as the cameras caught every second of her unraveling. She tried to interject, but Denzel raised his hand, firm, commanding, not aggressive, but final. The room stilled. "You want to talk about bubbles?" he continued, leaning in. "You're the one trapped in one. A bubble built by donors and cliques, where every hot take you sell keeps the lights on but dims the truth. You don't speak for the people, you speak for the paycheck. And deep down, you know it." The words landed like a hammer. Candace's lips parted, searching for a comeback, but nothing came. For the first time in the debate, she looked cornered, exposed. Denzel leaned back, crossing his arms, his voice dropping low, almost whispering, "History won't remember the tweets. It won't remember the sound bites. It'll remember whether you stood with the people, or stood on their backs. Right now, Candace, you're on the wrong side." The studio erupted into thunderous applause. Viewers at home could feel it. The moment the power in the room shifted completely, Candace forced a smile, the kind meant to hide panic but only revealed it more. She leaned toward the camera, trying to reclaim the stage. "You're twisting everything, Denzel," she insisted, her tone shaky. "I don't divide, I challenge. I tell people the hard truths they need to hear. If that makes me unpopular in rooms like this, so be it. At least I'm not afraid to call things as they are." It was an attempt at strength, but the audience wasn't buying it. The murmurs grew louder, whispers of disbelief flooding the studio. Denzel tilted his head, studying her like a man who'd heard this excuse too many times. Then, with a slight smirk, he leaned forward. "Hard truths," he repeated, his voice cutting through her defense. "Telling poor families they're lazy is not a truth, it's an insult. Telling people struggling with systemic barriers that it's their fault isn't brave, it's cruel. And when you call that honesty, Candace, what you're really doing is giving cover to those in power who want to keep things exactly as they are." The crowd roared, clapping and stomping their feet. The cameras caught Candace biting the inside of her cheek, her mask of confidence slipping again. Denzel didn't stop. His tone sharpened, but never lost its composure. "You call yourself fearless, but you never aim up. You don't challenge the billionaires who bankroll the chaos. You don't call out the corporations exploiting workers. You don't dare criticize the politicians writing the laws that keep people trapped. No, you punch down. Always down. And the reason is simple, it's easy, and it pays." Candace opened her mouth, but the words stuck in her throat. The audience gasped at the bluntness of Denzel's strike. He let the silence sit, his eyes locked on hers. "Courage," Denzel said finally, slow and deliberate, "isn't making the powerless feel smaller. Courage is holding the powerful accountable, even when it costs you everything. And that, Candace, is something you've never done." The applause thundered again, shaking the walls of the studio. Candace looked stunned, her shoulders tightening, her hand gripping the desk like she was holding on for balance. The battle was slipping away from her. Candace straightened suddenly, her voice rising as if sheer volume could undo the damage. "You think you're the savior, Denzel? You think your Hollywood speeches and your so-called wisdom change lives? No. You're an actor. You read lines. And now you're performing here, pretending to be some moral authority. But when the cameras go off, you'll go back to your mansion and your comfort, while the people you claim to defend are still struggling. Don't lecture me about courage. Her words echoed across the studio, desperate, fiery, but also fragile, like glass about to crack. Some in the audience booed, others gasped, the tension twisting tighter. Denzel leaned forward slowly, calm as stone, letting her rant hang in the air before answering. "You done?" he asked quietly. His voice wasn't raised, but the authority in it made the room fall silent. Then he delivered the blow. "You call me an actor. You're right, I tell stories. I use my craft to shine light on truths people want to ignore. But what's your role, Candace? What story do you tell? You stand in front of the same cameras and feed lies that make suffering invisible. You play the role of the cheerleader for power, the critic of the powerless. That's not courage. That's complicity." The audience erupted, cheers, applause, a few people even standing. Candace tried to interrupt, but Denzel held up a hand. "No, you had your turn. Now listen. I don't need to prove my authenticity to you. I've walked into neighborhoods where kids don't have clean water, where parents skip meals to feed their children. I've looked them in the eye. And I'll tell you what I never did, I never told them their pain was their fault. You did. Over and over again." Candace's jaw clenched, her eyes flashing with anger, but no words came. Denzel leaned back, voice steady, cutting, final. "You think I'm performing? No. The performance is yours. And tonight, Candace, the mask is slipping." The studio exploded, the kind of eruption that couldn't be contained, cheers mixed with gasps, the undeniable sense that a line had been drawn. The studio felt like it was vibrating, the sound of the crowd swelling, then fading into a tense quiet as Candace shifted in her chair. Her lips pressed together, her eyes darting, searching for something, anything, that could turn the tide. But Denzel had already taken the oxygen out of the room. He leaned forward one last time, his voice low but carrying the weight of a hammer. "Candace, the truth isn't glamorous. It doesn't sell books. It doesn't make you a darling of the networks. But it's heavy. And when you spend your life denying it, pretending division is unity and cruelty is courage, it eventually crushes you." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Just silence. Denzel didn't let up. "You accuse me of acting? Fine. But at least I don't stand on a stage every day performing for approval from people who drop you the second you stop playing their script. That's not power, it's dependency. And you call it freedom." The crowd gasped, then clapped, then roared. But Denzel wasn't done. He straightened his posture, adjusted his jacket, and delivered the line that would replay endlessly across social media, cut into clips, stamped on headlines, etched into memes. "You say my words don't change lives. Maybe not. But tonight, yours ended a lie. And when people go home, they'll remember one thing: the truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to be said." The studio erupted. The noise was deafening, cheers, stomps, whistles, the kind of sound that felt like it might crack the ceiling. Candace sat frozen, her smirk erased, her face locked in that stunned stillness that only comes when the fight is over and everyone knows who won. Denzel leaned back, calm once again, almost serene, as if the storm around him wasn't even his concern anymore. The camera zoomed in just as he glanced at the crowd and gave the faintest nod, a signal not of victory, but of finality. The screen faded, but the words lingered like a scar: "The truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to be said." This wasn't just a debate. This was a line in the sand. Denzel didn't just argue, he dismantled. And when the lights went down, the world didn't remember Candace's words, they remembered the silence that followed.